We are in the book of Matthew, continuing this morning in the parables. This morning in Matthew 21, verses 33 through 46. The parable of the wicked vine dressers. Not just vine dressers, wicked ones. That one word wicked just sticks in my mind when I was thinking about this message. Just wicked. In verse 33, let's read a little bit of it before we get into it. Here another parable, Jesus says. There was a certain landowner who planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a tower. And he leased it to the vine dressers and went to a far country. Sometimes it feels like God's in a far country, don't it? Sometimes it does. I mean, it seems like he's just so far away. But he went into a far country. Now, when vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vine dressers that they might receive its fruit. And the vine dressers took his servants, and he beat one, they killed one, and then they stoned another. They were very wicked folks. Then again, he sent other servants, more than the first. And they did likewise to them, mistreated them. Then last of all, he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But, verse 38 says, when the vine dressers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. So they took him and they cast him out of the vineyard and they killed him. And we know who they're talking about, right? Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to these vine dressers? That's the question in the parable. And what did we say a parable was? Earthly story, heavenly meaning. Yeah. A story about the here and now that has to do with the there and the then. So in verse 41, they said to him, he will destroy those wicked men miserably and lease his vineyard to other vine dressers who will render to him the fruits in their seasons. And Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. So you didn't know Jesus was an Indian, right? Chief cornerstone, right? Yeah. That good one? See, I say my best ones for you guys. You should feel blessed, privileged. And this was the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous. It's marvelous in our eyes, he says. So let's look at this word wicked. The definition, because I think, and the reason that I felt like maybe I should kind of ruminate on this particular word is, I think in our day, in our society, in our culture, that this word has almost become a good thing, right? We use it in a positive way. Man, that was wicked, they would say, right? We don't mean that it was bad, but it was good. See how sometimes words lose their meaning? Maybe we started out as a joke, but after a while it becomes, you forget what it was really originally associated with. And so in this particular text, the definition, you use wicked to describe someone or something that is very bad and deliberately harmful. Not just accidentally, I had an accident. Deliberately harmful. Jesus described these vine dressers, these men, as being wicked and deliberately harmful. It's a very bad description of who these men were. And I think of all the parables that we've discussed so far, this one by far is the most pointed parable, in that the crowd that he's talking to now, these religious leaders, are present, and they've been pressing him. They've been after him. They're wanting to get to him. And now he's pointing his parables directly to his enemies. His enemies are right there, in and around him. And so they're wicked. They seem to be righteous, but really they're wicked. Let's go on a little farther. So therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. What nation is he talking about? He's talking about the church. He's talking about us today. God took what he gave to Israel, and he gave that to the Gentiles, to the church age people. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. And whoever falls on this stone, goes right back to that psalm, back to the Old Testament. Whoever falls on this stone will be broken. But upon whoever it falls, it will grind him to powder. So just think about that for a minute. Whoever falls on this stone will be broken. That's a good thing. You understand that? That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Falling means giving up control. Does it not? You ever see somebody start to stumble and they keep on stumbling all the way across the room? I think I just rather fall than half fall. Half fall is more embarrassing than a whole fall, isn't it? I mean, you're walking past a whole crowd of people you're stumbling and they're like, don't forget the right next time, right? Right? And so whoever falls on this stone will be broken. Brokenness means, in this particular text, a wonderful thing. You know, and somebody has said that, it might have been one of you said this in one of our posts that I read, that the reason that we're broken is because that's the only way the light can get in. And that's very true. And that's how God's light gets into us, because we're broken. And so whoever falls on this stone or falls to his knees and relents and gives up his self-control and gives it over to the Lord will be broken. But on the other hand, whomever it falls, it's going to grind him to powder. That's a bad thing. That's wicked right there. That's wicked. Now, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parable, now they're listening and they're listening. You ever be listening to somebody talk and they're just kind of going along on a monotonish thing, and all of a sudden it sinks in that they're talking about you? You know, you've been brought into a room for somebody to talk to you, and they're just talking and they're talking, and all of a sudden you realize they're talking about me. They're saying something negative about me in a roundabout way. You ever have that happen to you? You're like, or you even walked out of the room. You're walking out of the room, about 3 steps past the door, and you're like, oh, they're talking about me. I just got chewed out in a roundabout way. I mean, it happens. This is kind of a delay, a cognitive delay, which I've had most of my life, by the way. Right? I mean, you could say something really negative to me, but it still takes a little bit for it to sink in. It takes a little bit to sink in. And I don't know, maybe the Lord just gave that to me for safe. It's kind of a safety switch, maybe, so I don't, break my neck or jerk my neck when I really get it, kind of get it in a soft way. Man, I could tell you, I woke up out of a sleep and remembered something that happened years ago and realized that it wasn't a positive thing, it was a negative thing. And I was the blunt of the joke. And all the guys standing around me all knew. One time, they came to me and they said, excuse me. They said, Rick, this guy wants to whip your butt. He's going to meet you in the bathroom at lunchtime, and he's going to just whip your butt. He don't like you. I didn't even know the guy. And I said, really? And they said, that's what he said. I said, well, you tell him I'll meet him in the bathroom then. I'm going to whip his butt. So then they go to him, and they tell him, Rick said he's going to whip your butt. He said, well, tell him to meet me in the bathroom, then I'm going to whip his butt. This went on, and I'm sweating, and I'm all nervous about this, and I don't even know the guy. I don't know what kind of fighter he is or anything. I don't know. And I'm thinking, I'm going to get my butt whipped. Really. Yeah, I mean, you've been there? And so, I walk into the bathroom, and there's all these guys. I mean, the place is packed. And you can see them passing the money around. Yeah. I'm like, wow. And there he steps out of the stall, and he's ready and got his fist all cuffed up. And I said, wait a minute. I said, before we start, I said, I just want to know one thing. The guy said, what? I said, why you want to whip my butt? He said, I don't want to whip your butt. I said, well, I don't want to whip your butt either. And we look at it, and everybody's going, uh-oh, and they're all starting to walk away. Bill Kerrigan was his name. And we become best friends because they were putting us against each other, and the fight. And they're going to watch, and they're going to bet, and neither one of us could whip our way out of a wet paper bag. So it was going to be that much more fun, to watch us, and cognitively delayed a little bit, I guess. And but I finally caught on to what was going on. Life is like that sometimes, What did Forrest Gump say? Like a box of chocolates, right? You never know what you're going to get. Of course, I always, break the bottoms of them, see what's in them before I eat them, right? Put them back in the yellow wrapper and box them back up. I don't like them surprises. So anyway, this particular context, they've got their choice, and he's surrounded by these guys that are passing money around, and there's Jesus, and they're wanting to get rid of him. They don't like him, but he's not so cognitively delayed as I am, and he's aware of what they're really plotting against him. He knows what's in the heart of men. And the chief priests, the Pharisees, heard his parables. See, they'd been gathering. And they perceived that he was speaking about them. They're getting it. He's a roundabout way saying, you folks are what? Wicked. You're a wicked bunch of people. But they didn't see themselves as wicked. They saw themselves as righteous. They saw themselves as God's people. They saw themselves as much better than anybody else in the crowd. And they had special little phylacteries and, little garments and things on their head and big old heavy chains. So there's some people that thinks the bigger the cross, the more religious you are, right? There's a big old cross, Not everybody that wears a cross around the neck's a Christian. They're not. They're just not. I'm telling you. And these people were not Christian. Jesus described them as being wicked in spite of their self-proclamation of being the most righteous. They were very self-deceived. And I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and he is so confused. He said, I'm a Christian, but I believe in evolution. I believe that I come from a monkey, and all that stuff. And, yeah, Darwinism and all that. And he said, I just don't believe that a holy God, a loving God, would send anybody to hell. That's what he said. And I said, you know what? I don't either. I don't think anybody that's ever going to ever be in hell was ever sent there by God. No. That's a choice they make. God doesn't want them to go there. He does everything that he can to keep them from going there. But in spite of all that, they still find themselves there. Not because of a holy, loving God, but despite of it. Right? That's an old argument. And so these chief priests and these Pharisees heard his parables, and they perceived that he was speaking to them. But when they sought to lay hands on him, something stopped them. What was it? All these multitudes of people around him, they loved him. They absolutely loved Jesus because they took him for a prophet. A big difference in attitude and perception between these people and Jesus himself. So here in the parable of the wicked vine dressers, Jesus vividly describes the sinfulness of those religious leaders who were rejecting the very Son of God. They were openly rejecting him. And so, to me, the landowner, the meaning of the parable, the landowner who planted the vineyard is clearly God here in this parable. The wicked vine dressers represents Israel's leaders. That was the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You know why they called them the Sadducees, right? They didn't believe in God, so they were sad, you see. That's how it goes, right? I'd be sad too. The servants who were sent on behalf of the landowner represents the prophets, the Old Testament guys that came. And the landowner's son, of course, is Jesus Christ himself. It's very clear what he was saying. And they, in their cognitiveness, the ladenness, they finally got around to realizing he's talking about them. And the builders were the religious leaders of the nation. The stone which they were rejecting was Christ himself. And yet this stone would become the great chief cornerstone. Right? By God himself, that was by God's choice, in which God would build something new. And he did. What was this new thing that God built? The church, right? Us, today. Did you know that when he was hanging on the cross, you were on his mind? You like that song? Yeah. When he was on the cross, I was on his mind. He was thinking about me. I might not have been born yet, but he was still thinking about me. On that cross, on those hours that he hung there, I can guarantee you, he was thinking, Mary Todd. She's a crazy woman, but I love her. Right? That's what he was thinking, wasn't he? Yeah. Old Rick. Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do with that boy, but I sure love him. I think this is going to go a long way in helping him. I was on his mind, right? Sure. Now, Casey, I better hang here just a little bit longer for him. Right? All right. It's going to take a little bit. Right? That's the difference, right? That's the difference. He's talking about you, and he's talking about the church in all of this. I like this by J.C. Ryle. Christ is never fully valued until sin is clearly seen. And that makes a lot of intellectual sense to me. That until I clearly see, and that goes back to this thing about I fall and I land on the stone and I'm broken. But if I don't do that and I take my chances in life on my own good works, that later on in eternity I'm going to be that rock, that same stone, that chief cornerstone is going to be the very one that will grind me into powder someday. Not by his choice, but by my own choice. It's what I have chosen for myself by the way that I've lived here. And I think this is the message right here. So obvious was Jesus' meaning and intent in telling this parable that the religious leaders would have arrested him at that moment, had it not been for the people that were around him that loved him and protected him from them. And I think there's a lesson here for you and I today. I think there really is a very, very good lesson for you and I to apply to our lives, because anytime you teach from a Bible that's about, well, this was written over 2,000 years ago, and the Bible itself has been written over a period of 4,000 years. So there's got to be something that's in it for you and I, and we're gathered together to read God's Word. And I think that the lesson is this, that God bestows wonderful privileges. There's never a better time to be living than in the age of grace dispensation. That's where you're living in right now. Grace dispensation is a period of time where whoever is born during that time, all they have to do is call on the name of Jesus and all their sins will be forgiven and they'll be saved. That's just a very nice time of life to be living in. So I think we have some privileges as the church. He had done wonderful things for Israel up to that point, but now Israel had continually rejected him, and sent him to the cross to die. And now he said, you know what? You guys, you wicked vine dressers, you're going to be ground to powder. But there's going to be some other folks coming, much like the prophets, who are going to fall upon the stone, see, and be broken. And I'm sending this to them. They were like the precious vineyard to him, the church. He had given them laws, now Israel. He had given them laws, priests, and prophets, and they'd killed them all. They had rejected them all. And he eventually, in the end of it, sent Christ, his own son. He would listen to these other people. Remember in Luke chapter 15, I don't know if you've read the story of of Lazarus. Not Lazarus, but the rich man and Lazarus. And the rich man, when he died and he went to hell, in hell he looked up and he saw Lazarus over there in Abraham's bosom, or over in the paradise side of Hades. And the rich man cried out in from hell over to that great gulf that was fixed between the two of them. And he said to Moses, he said, hey, why don't you let me go back into the world for a little bit? And Moses said, what? He said, because if I can go, I got 5 brothers, and I want to go back and tell them not to come here. He said, please let me go. Let me out of hell. Let me go back into the world for just a little bit so I can tell my family not to come to this terrible place. And what was the answer? I sent my only son, and they didn't listen to him. What makes you think they're going to listen to you? If there was ever anybody that we should listen to, it should be Jesus Christ, God's only son. In the book of Hebrews, in the 1st chapter, he actually says that in these last days, in the 1st chapter of the book of Hebrews, in these last days, God has spoken to us through who? His son. He's the last word on the deal. There's never going to be anybody else that's ever going to come out of heaven or anywhere else and say, oh, yeah, what was that guy's name that used to say, and now the rest of the story. Remember that? Paul Harvey. There's never going to be a Paul Harvey. There's never going to be anybody else ever come and say, hey, Jesus sent me to tell you the rest of the story. The rest of the story's been told. In these last days, God has spoken by his son, Jesus Christ. And if anybody comes to me and says, oh, I believe in Jesus, but I also believe in all this other crap, that's not Jesus talking at all. That's just crap talking. That's all that is. Now, I love that person, but I don't love the crazy stuff they're trying to mix into Christianity, and kind of the yin-yang kind of thing, kind of crazy stuff, How about us today? I guess that's the question. Which side, which group are you going to be in? The wicked group, the rejecting group, the son-hating group. The world is a son-hating world. They hate the son. They hate him. They hate everything that he stands for. They hate the Bible. They hate what the Bible teaches in the world today. It's this postmodern attitude. And This kind of thinking. It's sad, but it's a day in which we live. It's just the reality of things. Reject or abuse their given privileges. This is the judgment that's going to happen to these people. Israel is a prime example of what happens. They were rejected by God. We need to be grateful for what God has done in our lives. Always be careful to give Him gratitude. We would talk a lot about gratitude. Always being grateful. How many got up on the right side of the bed this morning? Right? Thank you. Good job. Remember what they said? You know, it's a bad day when you get up out of bed and you miss the floor. It's a bad day, right? Yep. What we have learned this morning is just a couple simple things that really, I think, you know, what I like about preaching is if you're like me and you're sitting there when I'm sitting there and the preacher's preaching, he might be saying one thing, but there's a whole host of things coming up my mind it reminds me of. I mean, I could sit there and write my own sermon, you know, just based on one little thing he said. But you got to understand that one little thing I said was probably just for you, although I said a lot of things. And so that's the way preaching works. What we have learned is God has given us some wonderful blessings. And lastly, we need to be grateful. Really be that person that becomes broken, that gives up the self-control, that is willing to fall upon that stone and be broken. Amen? Amen. Let's stand together this morning.